Hi, everyone. My name is Ethan Campbell, and on behalf of Dr. Rendon and the Gardner Institute, I want to welcome you to today's recorded webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Laura Rendon. She's a professor emerita and co-director of the Center for Research and Policy in Education at the University of Texas, San Antonio, and a member of the Gardner Institute board since 2017. Dr. Rendon, happy to welcome you today. Look forward to this presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ethan and Stephanie. It's my pleasure to join everyone with this special talk on contemplative pedagogy and student engagement. I want to begin by acknowledging the era in which we live. And as we all know, this is a very, very challenging time for our nation, a challenging time for education, for our healthcare system, for our economy. I know that so many of you that are watching are going through some tough times. And really, when I see my Twitter feed and Facebook, I note how many faculty and staff are expressing how overwhelmed they are, how they're having to deal with so many issues and the strangeness in their bodies and the strangeness in just how everything has changed. You know, we're kind of in a liminal stage right now, neither here nor there, you know, straddling the world that we used to know and the new world that is emerging. And so I thank you for joining me at this time where we all need to come together because we are together experiencing this, although some experience more of the challenges than others. So I just wanted to acknowledge where we are right now and let you know that I'm feeling it too and taking it a day at a time. I also want to begin by just saying a little bit about how I step into this work of contemplative pedagogy, where I've really been looking at these issues for a while now. And as I think about the work that we do, I wrote a poem a couple of weeks ago. It's called Realm Shift, Entering a New World. And I expressed that, you know, let us remember the darkness that can bring forth our finest hour. In this realm shift, we come to know that a new reality is in store for us, a new reordered promised land, as Luther King would call it. Now we learn that the I is about the we, and that we are all in this together. So what I want to express today is a little bit about what would it look like to work with students in the way that brings out the best in them, and what are the skills and competencies that are needed in this very, very challenging era. This photo here is an old photo of me. This is my 6th birthday in Laredo, Texas, where I was born. And to the right of me is my little sister, Ileana, and to my left is my cousin, Elma. And I wanted nothing more than a pair of moccasins for my 6th birthday. You can see the house that we used to live in the background. It's not a very nice house. It was a time of great struggle for me and my siblings, my 2 sisters, and my mother, who had to work really hard to help the family survive. So we grew up in poverty and had lots of challenges. And I think some of that sort of resilience is helping me now. It's actually helped me along the way. So I've never forgotten where I come from. And so I step into this discussion about student success, not just in an academic way, not just in an intellectual way, but in one in which I have felt what it means to be in poverty and to be labeled someone that wasn't going to succeed, wasn't going to amount to very much, not having gone to the best schools and having the best credentialed teachers or having schools that were well resourced, Laredo had one of the highest poverty levels in the nation at the time. And so I step into this discussion about student success, knowing that despite the fact that I succeeded, there are still many who are struggling, and even more struggles at this point in our lives, with finances, with micro and macroaggressions, with racism, with sexism, with homophobia, with all kinds of issues that get in the way of us really being and growing into a pattern where we actually see some success in our lives, where we become transformed. And so I basically went from the barrio of Laredo, Texas, all the way to the University of Michigan, where I received a doctorate. And now having the privilege of speaking to people like you, who also want to make a difference for students who grow up like me, with hopes and with dreams, but often not knowing how to realize them. And so I want to begin with some of the things that I have learned that are helpful in terms of helping students to become more successful, not only getting into college, but getting through college and earning a college credential. And one of the most important things that I have learned is the importance of validating students. And in the 1990s, I developed a theory of validation, speaking to students and asking them to share their experiences, particularly in their first semester of college and what was helping them. And when we asked them, why are you still in college while others have dropped out? They spoke about the experiences that they had had with faculty and staff who reached out to them, who believed in them, who offered an authentic sense of caring and support for them that they remembered even now. And basically, I call that validation. And it's when we take the initiative to reach out and to help students believe in their ability to learn, believe that they can be successful. And also when we reach out to them and help them with their personal and social adjustment. Just to give you another example here of what I mean by validation, academic validation is when we take action to help our students to acquire confidence, to believe that they can do this. Because many students, we have to know, don't have the privilege of being told you're going to be successful. Some of them have never made an A in their lives. Some of them come from families where no one has been to college. And so for them, college is a brand new experience. I remember talking to a faculty member at a community college in Arizona, and there was a group of students there, and what they were talking about was their experiences in the first semester of college. And there was this woman there, and happened to be a white woman who was very vivacious. You could tell she was a leader. You could tell she was very enthusiastic about learning. And I asked her, what made the difference for you? You seem really excited and, a go-getter, and I know you're gonna, be very successful. And she said, my husband left me and my 3 kids. I thought I needed a 4.0 to come to this community college. I had no idea what college was like. And I asked her, so what turned you around? And she said, it was my communications instructor. I said, tell me more. And she said, my communications instructor had us give a talk, and she had us tape the talk. And she said, this communications instructor became like an idol to me because she helped me to believe I could learn. I taped the talk. I was watching the talk with my peers in class. And as I was watching myself on tape, I said to myself, look at you, you can do this. And what that communications instructor had done, knowingly or not, was to set up the classroom so that students could witness themselves as powerful learners because they had not had that experience of knowing that they could do this, that they could be successful, that they could learn, that they could be a bona fide college student. And so that's an example of academic validation. Interpersonal validation is when we take action to help students to develop themselves socially, to feel this sense of caring and support that we communicate to our students. Barbara Jaffe at El Centro Community College in California actually gives students her cell phone number and says to students, know that whenever you need help, I'm here for you. And that kind of outreach to help students in need, to help students when they're having tough times, to help students beyond the classroom, meeting with them in the library, meeting with them in the cafeteria, even saying hello, and that sort of recognition and affirmation means a lot, particularly to low-income first-generation students. And so, validation, we have to think about it in terms of different ways that we can validate students. And here are some best practices. It's about us validating their voice and their experience, that what they bring to the classroom is as important as what others bring. Validating their culture, recognizing that their cultures have strengths and they can contribute to American society based on who they are and what their culture brings to the nation. Avoiding deficit thinking and treating students as human beings. Recently I was at Cal State San Marcos and I met Associate Vice President Jeffrey Gilmore. And he was talking about his experience as a child when he went to Vancouver, Canada with his family. As a child, he said, I felt something strange, but I couldn't quite name it. It just felt strange being in Vancouver and the way that people treated me as a child. And he said, I went back to Vancouver as an adult, as a professional, and I remembered the time that I had been there as a child, and I compared the time that I had been there early on in my life and now. And he said the difference was that later on in life, I got treated as a human being. I got treated as a human being. And he remembered that. And so we have to come to the classroom and enter the classroom space, whether we do it online or face-to-face, as not just professors, not just as counselors and as mentors, but as human beings, as people who can feel, as people who can care, as people who can be supportive. And so validating students as human beings, getting to know more about them, validating their language and cultural traditions are extremely important. More examples about validation include validating their identities. Students today are really smart. They know that they have multiple identities. They lead intersectional lives, and we've got to validate them for who they are. And then we also need to consider how does validation play with online learning? How faculty and staff have been thrust into these remote learning situations where whether we were ready for it or not, they have to do it. And there's a new book out by Costa and Pacancy Brock on online learning and using of videos. And the book notes that research shows that online learning works best when faculty build regular, positive, and interactive relationships with students. And that's all about validation. In fact, tip number 25, if I recall correctly, says validate students. So it's again, showing up not just as a professor, but as a human being. Even online, we can convey caring and support through the messages that we send, through videos that we develop, praising success, validating their ability to be successful, being reassuring, using videos to capture our caring and empathy, and letting students know that we're aware that this is a difficult situation. Some of them are caring for their families at home, for little kids, or someone who's ill. They themselves may be ill. This is a very, very tough time for everyone. So that's about validation. The other thing is about the importance of recognizing and validating student strengths, student assets, moving away from deficit-based perspectives to asset-based education. I want to talk a little bit about a study that Amaury Nora and Vijay Kanagala did at the University of Texas, San Antonio. And we interviewed Latinx students, and we wanted to learn about what were the positive and negative aspects of the college experience for them, what was good and what was not so good. And then what were the cultural assets that they employed to become survivors and to move past some of the challenges that they faced. And so we interviewed 47 students in focus group settings. And out of those 47, we pulled out 6 and we did one-on-one interviews with those students. And here's what we learned with regard to their strengths. And they had formidable strengths that are often not well recognized or validated. To examine their strengths, we turned to Terrace Yoso's community cultural wealth model. And basically what Yoso says is that even in low-income communities where many think there's nothing going on there, that people there aren't doing very much, that they're just watching TV, that basically there are strengths there. These individuals are survivors. I mean, they do backbreaking work to help the family survive. They support their kids. We should not view those communities with a deficit-based perspective. She says you're going to find family capital in these communities, social capital, navigational capital, resistant capital, linguistic capital, and aspirational capital. And she calls all of those forms of capital community cultural wealth. And so we wanted to find out when we interviewed our students whether they talked about these forms of capital, these assets, and indeed they did. And we found many of the forms of capital that Yoso expresses, but we also found other forms of capital that were not in that model. And let me talk about those. One of those is called ganas, what Jaime Escalante in the film Stand and Deliver calls ganas. You gotta wanna do this, or perseverance, that inner strength, that determination to succeed, and recognizing and embracing the sacrifice that they needed to make to attend college. I mean, these students said, I want to do this. This is something that's important for me. The second one is something called giving back. One of my former doctoral students, Nicole Salas Reyes, did a dissertation study of Native college graduates. And she looked at what is called giving back because those students use this way of giving of themselves, giving of their communities as a motivator for them to continue, persist, and as a motivator for them to then, even when they completed college, to keep on giving. And indeed, this is something that we found in Latinx students that we interviewed as well. Giving back showed up in these ways, being proud of their heritage and being proud in being at an HSI because it proved that Latinos could do this, recognizing microaggressions and inequities, wanting to complete college because they recognized others had paved the way and they knew that they could be role models. They wanted to use their education not just as a way to say, okay, I've got a diploma, I'm going to hang it on the wall, but basically to say, how can I now help others? How can I now make this world a better place to live? So giving back is a formidable asset for students. Another asset was their spirituality and their faith. Many of these students came to interviews with religious bracelets and pendants, and they talked about when times got tough, they would pray, they would turn to God or their higher power. They also had a sense of meaning and purpose, and they embraced concepts such as gratitude, goodness, and compassion. Pluriversal is another asset, and that's a fancy word for holding multiple and competing systems of meaning and tension. In other words, they didn't just focus on this is either or, but more along the lines of both and. For example, you could have a student who would say, I was undocumented and now I'm documented. I'm Mexican, I'm American, I speak English, I speak Spanish. And all of those are forms of their identity. They're not picking that or the other, but basically all of these identities are what make them whole. And then we interviewed 6 of these students, and I want to show a short video clip of this student. Her name is Sylvia. She was previously undocumented. She was married, no kids. And so here is Sylvia talking about giving back and paving the way for others.
Scared. Because that means if I'm one of the first, I'm pretty much the one setting up the path for the ones that are coming behind me. And that means that whatever decisions I make or whatever path I choose to take, it's not only going to affect me, but it's going to affect everyone coming behind me, whether it's my sister, my neighbor, or just any female or Latina that's, you know, the next generation. And that's pretty scary because it's not just me anymore.
So that's again an example of giving back. And so what the message here is, you know, we have to look at students in terms of the strengths that they bring. This isn't about just saying, oh, you know, it's too overwhelming, you know, they don't want to learn, they're at risk, they can't speak English. I mean, these students have a lot of strengths that we need to leverage. We also did a study at UTSA, and the way that we conducted this study is that we asked students to write essays. I'm going to talk now about STEM students. These are the people who wrote the STEM essay were Latinx students who had actually earned a STEM degree. And we asked them to write essays as to how they did it, their whole trajectory from, you know, starting a STEM degree to actually finishing a STEM degree. And we analyzed those essays, which appear in the book, The Latino Student Guide to STEM Careers, that I co-edited with Vijay Kanagawa. And those essays are there, and you can access them through that book. But we learned that a big thing that helped Latinx STEM graduates was their assets. And so here's some of the assets of these STEM graduates. Again, giving back. You know, the fact that they earned a STEM degree, again, was not just to say, I have a degree and let's move on. Basically, they wanted to use their knowledge for a number of reasons. One is they wanted to be of service to the Latinx community and to the greater society, and they wanted to address inequities and the underrepresentation of Latinx students in STEM. Another great asset of Latinx STEM students was curiosity. Having this sense of wonder, you know, being the white kid of the family, wanting to know how things work. So giving back and curiosity are 2 very, very significant assets. And here's just a couple of quotes. One is from Rodolfo Jimenez. He talks about, you know, having a mentor, and it was their guidance that helped him, and he wants to give back to the community as well as the world in any way that he can. And then Marina Suarez talks about the opportunity to give back to the community that I grew up in has been one of the most rewarding parts of my job. Curiosity, you know, Marina Suarez is a faculty member at UTSA and very much into archaeology, and she and her twin sister love to go and, you know, look for bones. And so one day she said, you know, the site that we visited had many bones, and they were very excited because one of them was named for my twin sister and me, Geminiraptor suarosarum. And I always get a kick out of that because I didn't know that we had a dinosaur named for two Latinas. So, you can jot that down as a significant achievement. So that was great news. And that was Marina Suarez at UTSA. Diana del Angel talks about, if I had to summarize my life journey, I would say it was fueled by a need to know. Even as a young girl, I always wanted to know what happens when you put a snail, a grasshopper, and a fuzzy worm in the same jar. Curiosity can get you stung by insects or punished by your abuela, but curiosity can also reroute your career life. More assets include navigational, phenomenal asset for students. These were students that, some of them had left their native country and had to come to America to learn a new language, a new culture, new traditions, new values. They did it. They figured things out. Some of them had to change their majors, and they kind of figured their way, through the system, through all of what they had to do, sometimes with little or no assistance. And then, of course, they had the ganas, the perseverance, the resilience, the determination to just keep on going despite the challenges that they faced. So I talked about validation, the importance of support and caring for students. I talked about the importance of leveraging students' strengths and moving away from deficit perspectives. The third theme that I want to address is the importance of working with students through contemplative pedagogy. I want to begin by noting that contemplative pedagogy, as far as I'm concerned, has never been more important, because we have not just the horrendous virus outbreak that we are facing today, but we have multiple issues for which we're struggling for solutions, all the way from climate change and gun violence and immigration issues, religious intolerance, racism, sexism, poverty. I mean, we could go on, and that's just, a short list of the issues that we confront in our society. And unfortunately, we don't have the best answers for these issues. And so I think to myself, what kind of an education do we need to provide to our students, especially the next generation, to help us with addressing these issues? And these issues, as far as I'm concerned, require not just intellectual development. They require for our students and that next generation to be good human beings, to be fair, to be compassionate, to know suffering and to address suffering. And so, we need a contemplative pedagogy. And so essentially, I give a definition here, for those of you that are new to this. We're really talking about a pedagogy that blends attention both to intellectual development and to the cultivation of the inner life. We want students to be really smart, great critical thinkers, problem solvers, people that can take data and make sense out of that. I mean, I want our students to be like super intelligent, but we also want them to work with some of their inner life skills, to develop a sense of purpose, to have a sense of social consciousness and giving back, insight, awareness. I mean, we can add, to that list. And to do that, we add what are known as contemplative practices to the intellectual part. We combine both. And those contemplative practices are used to foster deep learning experiences. So contemplative practices quiet the mind in order to cultivate personal capacity for deep concentration and insight. For example, we could use within the classroom environment or within the projects that we assign where students might complete them out of class, things such as meditation and just moments of silence, bringing in art, poetry, free writing, yoga, music, having students participate in nature, ritual, journaling, community service work. There are many examples of contemplative practices that could be used in combination with having students learn the ideas and the materials and the substance of what is being taught in their books and in the things that they need to learn. And the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society, they have a very nice website, and there's some of the folks that are leading the work with regard to contemplative pedagogy. Where I step into contemplative pedagogy is my book called Sentipensante Pedagogy. And with that book, I talk about a pedagogy that blends sensing and thinking. So again, the intellectual and the emotional, the sensory parts of our humanity. It's a culturally validating experience. It humanizes education while not sacrificing academic rigor. It engages students in deep learning. It connects social justice through pedagogy and engages students in contemplative practices as they work on equity and justice projects. So I interviewed a number of faculty for my book, and I'm going to showcase some of them to provide you with some examples of contemplative pedagogy that I call sensing, thinking pedagogy. And so the first one is my very good friend, Norma Cantu, who's a professor of English at Trinity University. She's the author of the book Canicula, an autobiography that features photographs of her childhood. So what Norma does is in her book Canicula, she takes a photograph of her childhood and she uses that photograph as a means to write a narrative, a story about what was happening, that is captured in that photograph. And she calls that guided imagery. One of those photographs is of her little brother, Tino. Tino used to sit next to me in high school in journalism class. And the photograph of Tino in her book is Tino holding a rifle and, pointing the rifle. And he's doing that as a young child. Tino was the first Laredoan to be killed in the Vietnam War. And so she writes from that photograph of Tino. And she uses that same sort of guided imagery to help her students to write. Many of the students that Norma teaches have been told, you cannot write. Many of these students are afraid of writing. Many of these students feel that, perhaps they'll never learn to write. And so she helps students to write from what they know, write from what they have experienced, write from a photograph. And here is Dr. Cantu talking about how she helps students to write and to connect to their lives.
I guess the writing, whenever we work with writing, we're really working with spiritual things. And before I even wrote Canicula, I used to have an exercise for my students to remember a photograph of themselves as children and write about it. And I'm teaching description and commas, sentence combining and all this stuff. But I have them do these guided imagery exercises and they write. And one student was writing it, and it gets very emotional because it's about themselves and their families and all that. But I guide them. We start with things that are more innocuous, so we get to something that's more personal. And they wrote it and went home. And they take it home. They read it in their small groups. They take it home, revise, edit, and then turn it in for me to grade. And this one student came back, and her eyes were puffy, and she said, "I cried all night." She says, "You have helped me to know my mother." How? I had asked them to write it. She went in, and the picture she remembered was of her mom and she with her kid, her siblings, all huddled around her mother. And so she wrote about that picture, and then she started talking to the mother. And so no durmió. She was up working on that paper all night. Came back the next morning and told me this, and was so grateful. I can't say that I can't take credit and say I did it. I allowed it to happen. And those are the kinds of moments, and this is just one example of how something worked.
So as I'm showing you these examples, you might want to think about, some ideas and how you might apply some of these tools within the work that you do in your own disciplines. The second example is my also very good friend, Alberto Pulido. He's a professor of ethnic studies and sociology at the University of San Diego. And his tool is called the Cajita Project. You see an example of a cajita there on the right hand, and that's a student in my class when I was at Iowa State. And basically, a cajita is literally, you can say that it's a box, but these are arts-based boxes where students are given an assignment. In this case, I asked students to reflect on their lives. These are students who are going to be student affairs administrators. And I wanted them to think not just about those students out there that we're going to be working with, but to really reflect on who they were. The people that had influenced them in their lives, the experiences that had an impact on their lives, the gifts that they brought to the student affairs environment, the kind of person that they wanted to be, the kind of student affairs administrator that they wanted to be that could have an impact on students. And so students reflected, and they brought their cajitas to class. And this one student developed this cajita. She's Puerto Rican. You can see the flag there. And she thought about the impact of her brother in her life. Her brother, passed away in an auto accident, and where she was very close by at the same time. And she had never grieved for him. Had the time for that, it was just so impactful for her. And this was a time that she could do it by putting together, this cajita. So here's Dr. Pulido talking about how he employs cajita during the Day of the Dead, which is a very important time in the Latinx community where we honor our ancestors, we honor those that have passed on. And so Dr. Pulido has his students reflect on the people that have made an impact on their lives and their own upbringing and their culture, and they write about that. And so here's Dr. Pulido talking about one particular cajita that a student had developed.
So this box here was done by a student named Valerie Parra. And the title you can see on the top sheet, I usually ask students to write like a narrative, which the students here today did a great job in. And it's called My Life as a Mestiza, Valerie Parra. And the little that I know about it, the discussions that we had about it, was that she considers herself part Chicana and part Apache. And so when you look at the imagery in terms of the symbols, you see some of the traditional symbols that you would see in terms of being Mexicana or Chicana and that whole process. But then you see some of the Native American influence. And she did all these kind of different symbols around here. You can see, Christian symbols and Native American symbols. Up on top, which you can't get access to, there's an actual field of agricultural field. There's an eagle that's been carved in. There's a horse. There's some Native American symbols as well. And I think it just captures what the students were talking about in terms of those dualities and living in those multiple worlds.
I love the Cajita project. I just want to share a couple of more. This Cajita is also from one of my former students at Iowa State, and his name is, he's now Dr. Vijay Kanagawa. He's a professor now at Salem State University. And so when I made the assignment, he wasn't sure what to do. I was like, Ajita, what is that? And one time he saw this suitcase all torn and tattered, and he picked it up, was on his way to throw it away in the dumpster, and his mom runs after him and says, don't throw that away. And he goes, why not? And she goes, you don't understand. That suitcase carried all that we owned, all our belongings when we moved from India to the United States. And so that became Vijay's cajita, and you can see the artifacts, the things that have had a lot of impact on his life. And when students talk about these stories in class on a volunteer basis, they're just extremely powerful. It just becomes one of the most precious moments of the class. Here's another example. This is Alicia, and Alicia's cajita is that scarf that she has wrapped around her waist. It's in honor of her grandmother, who lived in Liberia during the 90s when they were having a civil war. And they were never sure when soldiers would be coming to invade the village. And so the women would put all of their belongings inside these scarves. And should the soldiers arrive, they could depart from the village, run away with their most prized possessions inside of those scarves. And so in honor of her grandmother, Alicia's cajita is that scarf. I have many more pictures, but I don't have time, but I want to move on to another example here. This is another very good friend of mine and one of my mentors. I think of him as one of my mentors, Dr. J. Herman Blake. He taught African American Studies at Iowa State. He uses a number of contemplative tools, including audio narratives, the use of photos and music, and he engages students in reflective practices. So here's Dr. J. Herman Blake talking about how he uses contemplative pedagogy in his African American Studies course.
I use in the class some of my own material, my own research. I have them listen to, for example, when I talk about slavery, I have them listen to an interview done in 1968 with a woman whose mother was a breeder. And it was her mother's job to have babies. And this woman taught us. She was the 15th child of this woman, born just after peace declared, as she put it. She was, I think, 94, 98 or something like this. And I have a picture of her, which I show along with the transcript. I want to tell you, you can't hear that and walk away without thinking. When I get to talking about terrorism and violence, I use about 6 or 7 slides from that book, Without Sanctuary. And I raise 2 questions. Why do they lynch people? And then I show the pictures of the crowds who came to enjoy the spectacle, including young children. And one student wrote an essay saying this course is not only about learning, this course is about thinking. And you think all the time. I use music because the music was used by the people to illustrate these points. So when they hear this woman whose mother was a breeder, I play for them the spiritual. Lord, how come me here? I wish I never was born. When they see those slides about how people have been misused and mistreated, I had them listen to Nina Simone singing Strange Fruit. I just gave a lecture on the civil rights movement, and at the beginning of the 20th century, I had them listen to spiritual, Lord, I couldn't hear nobody pray, talking about the loneliness.
Yeah, I just consider Dr. Blake to be just a phenomenal educator. Just one more example here. This is Dr. Carlos Silvera. He teaches art education at Cal State Long Beach, where I had the pleasure of meeting him. His philosophy is based on Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is basically about liberation. He worked with children in the favelas of Brazil. He's Brazilian. He would go down there to the favelas, these shanty towns, so to speak, where some people would think those kids can't learn, they can't do art. Carlos would beg to differ. He actually worked with them on art projects, helped them to think about community, their community, and saving their communities. And so that was his form of service learning, going out there himself to work with the children in the favelas. And so he believes deeply in community service learning as a way to get students involved in their communities on projects that make a difference in their communities. And so he places students, for example, in shelters where, it might be, women who have experienced violence. It might be, having students, work on projects of Day of the Dead. It might be placing students working with the LGBT community. So here is Dr. Silveira talking about the service learning.
In service learning, we have a component that's very important, the reflection component, which can take place in several ways. For me, it's a discussion as a paper, as a final paper, as a weekly reflections, but they have to reflect on the experience, linking the theory in class with the experience in the community sites. But what they write or whatever, or what they share in the classroom is not only on a cognitive level, but affective. They have to tell me how they felt, how they feel about the experience, which is something that we forget sometimes. Emotionally, and my weekly reflections that I give to them every week, also, I ask them also for the emotional aspect.
So I showed you 4 examples of contemplative pedagogy, and usually I get a question about, oh, how do I do this in STEM? And so I thought about that. I'm not a scientist, but I have some ideas. And to me, I mean, STEM is, full of wonder, full of awe. I mean, that's a field. I mean, I wish I had been a scientist at one point. I was going to be. But I mean, there's so many issues confronting our society, from water quality. We saw the Flint crisis, for example. We've got this virus outbreak right now. We've got climate change going on. We have mental health issues going on. We have people afflicted by, things such as diabetes and cancer and liver disease. We've had hurricanes, flooding, declining infrastructure, on and on and on. I mean, all of those are, the kinds of topics that, again, leveraging the asset of giving back. These students want to give back. They want to be engaged in topics where they're not just learning the concepts, but they're actually making a difference in their communities. So how about involving students in service learning and having, students interview people impacted by these issues? How about having students work on photo exhibits or digital storytelling or documentaries? I mean, it calls on our creative mind to say, yes, I'm going to cover all of the content, but I'm going to do something that engages students in a deep learning experience as well. So those are just some ideas. So I want to end by emphasizing that now is a profound teachable moment. Now is the time for contemplative education, more so than ever. Now is the time that we're being gripped by fear and chaos, where we have an economic collapse, a health crisis. And so we've got to now rethink in this new world that is emerging. What's it going to look like on the other side? What are we going to change? What did we miss in the old world? And what do we need to do differently? What is this gift of opportunity that is being presented to us at this moment and in time? And so those are just some reflections for you as you think about this new model, so to speak, of teaching and learning, and what's it going to take for us to create this new generation of students that are skilled and knowledgeable students that are very intelligent, but also phenomenal human beings. And so I end with just a very short loving kindness meditation for all of you who are struggling, who are overwhelmed, who are dealing with these strange feelings in your bodies. And just to say to you that I wish you safety. I wish you continued physical and emotional healing. And I wish you love. Know that even if you're alone, there are many who are thinking about you, many surrounding you that you might not see, who are sending you good wishes and love always. Thank you for joining me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.